This week's Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you, as always, by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale, where it is time to get back to the basics. Visit StarCityGames.com/sale to save 15% on basic lands until Monday, August 16th at 10:59 a.m. That's foil lands, alpha lands, basic waste, and more. If you need snow-covered mountains, just in case your Ragavan reveals an Ice-Vein Coatl, the StarCityGames.com weekly sale has you covered, and it won't judge you for spending time on that decision. And if you're looking for some spells to cast, don't worry, because every Monday at 11 a.m., a new sale starts at StarCityGames.com/sale, where you might be able to find exactly what you're looking for.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here,
along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts and right here on StarCityGames.com.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with the sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people. You'll find a way to make it work. So take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey. I'm here with Ari Lax, and last week we went over the 4 good cards in modern, and this week we're going over the 5th. Is it bad, or is it just not as good as the rest of them?
It's somewhere in the middle. I started off with actual bad. I started reviewing lists, and things looked slightly better this week for it, but I think we'll get to that in a bit, because I think that as good as it might look on paper, it's still pretty dicey. And that color, by the way, is black. We talked about everything else last week.
Yes. You could make a very solid case that colorless is the 5th best color in modern right now, with black being a distant 6th, lagging at the back there. But we'll get into the structural reasons why that might be the case, and also just certain black cards, I suppose, that have maybe seen their star dim over time or just aren't that good at the moment. Before all of that, though, we'll get to the challenge results from this week, or rather the challenge result, because we are recording this on a Sunday night, preparing for a quick turnover for our new airing date on Tuesday. And as a result, we have like 1.5 challenge topics to go through. Not quite sure how to round out the Sunday challenge just yet. But let's start with the one we do know. And this is Saturday, where for the most part, Hammer winning, beating Murktide in the finals, got some Grixis decks, got some more of the same. You've heard all of this before. Some of the things that we haven't heard so much before, Glimpse of Tomorrow. I want to say finally cracking into a top 8 for the first time, or if it's not the first, it's at least single digits top 8 for that Cascade card, as compared to Crashing Footfalls and Living End, both of which are scattered throughout these results, and which we've also seen many, many, many times before.
Yeah, I kind of wrote about this briefly, I want to say now 2 weeks ago, when I was covering the various versions of each deck. And I think that there's a real cost to playing with Glimpse of Tomorrow when you have to cut Force and Negation out of your deck. because really just the free interaction is the best thing that these Cascade decks have going for them. But this deck is maxing out on Furies, which is a pretty big improvement from some of the prior lists.
Yeah, it's interesting to track how the color of the Cascade spell in question makes that card much more reliable and much more low cost, I guess you would say, in that deck. So the Footfalls decks really get to use Force of Vigor in a way that the Living End decks or the Glimpse of Tomorrow decks don't. And you can still play some Force of Vigors in your Glimpse of Tomorrow deck, and that may be quite advisable. But likewise, Living End, very in keeping with the theme of this episode, the best black deck in Modern right now is a Temur Cascade deck that somehow has enough black cards for Grief, which never plans on casting, along with the other black cards, except via the one Sunken Ruins that some of these decks play just as like the theoretical backdoor out if you draw the Grief and you're one off land to hardcast that sometimes.
Yeah. I was actually lining up to ask you what the best black decks in Modern are. And as soon as you said Living End, I was going to ask you how you're casting the black cards in that deck. So yeah, not very well.
Well, the second place finisher in that runoff may be the Asmo decks, where Asmo is usually a red card for the purposes of these discussions. And again, you've got we're buffing the count artificially via Street Wraith, which you can get scrappy with that one. We've all done it across the years, but for the most part, all of these black cards you're never planning to actually cast. And I guess even Leyline of the Void, which we're starting to see creep back into some sideboards here. That is technically a black card, but not actually a black card in practice. So it feels like if you wanted to be pedantic about it, black cards are not all that underrepresented in Modern. But in terms of people spending black mana to cast spells, you really have to dig deep here.
Yeah, and like even like Cauldron Familiar just goes straight from your hand to your graveyard with Cookbook. It's really just the Grixis and Rakdos Lurrus decks holding the fort for that, I think, pretty much at this point. Though, back to the Asmore decks, the return of those has kind of been a bit of the headline of this Saturday's event. There's one in 8th, another one pretty high up in the standings, and both of those are both Golgari base with no Troll King, heavy on Finale of Devastation.
Yeah, so let's look at the 8th place list here from Karan Chetty, one of the South African pros from back in the day. This is, I guess you would call it Jund Asmo. This is Renin 6, Grist the Hunger Tide seen in this main deck, alongside a real motley crew of creatures. We have Asmo, Street Wraith, Ovaltrace Daredevil, that package that we are all familiar with by now, alongside Ragavan and Tarmogoyf as a way to get some beefy cheap threats in there. And then we're rounding this out with 3 copies of Finale of Devastation, 2 Bone Shards as a good removal spell and additional way to turn on Asmore. I guess with Grist in your deck, you have at least a source of small fodder that you can sacrifice to the Bone Shards if need be, 4 Lightning Bolt, and then the 1 Shadow Spear to join the cookbooks here. And then after all of that, 21 lands to hopefully cast these spells, although I'm not sure how realistic that actually is when, you have 4 Urza Saga, so that's 4 slots spoken for, and then you're kind of obliged to play some number of basics in various colors and shock lands which miss a color out. And so when I'm looking at these Finale of Devastations, for example, I'm counting 4 Urza Saga, a Mountain, and a Blood Crypt that don't cast those. And at that point, am I casting that one on turn 2 all that often? I guess if I can count on Ragavan as mana fixing, then maybe. But I'm not too excited about that.
Yeah, I was going to say that Ragavan is a green sword, sort of. I think that one of the things that's most relevant about this list, and I believe the 11th place list also did not have Bone Shards, but the inclusion of Grist and Bone Shards is kind of a reaction to the increased number of Renin 6. Just having a way to cleanly clear that card because Asmore doesn't deal damage to Planeswalkers. That's a pretty big deal now in the metagame that wasn't really the case a couple weeks ago. I'm not a huge fan of Grist in general in Modern, but if it's doing something along these lines, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, I would say with Motide Region still being the ruling the roost in Modern, it's nice to have some additional answers to that, which, yes, Asmo has that covered in one sense, but you don't want to rely just on Asmo for your creature removal, especially when the Asmo draws where you have the whole food engine online, those tend to be the top of your range anyway. And so in the more scrappy games, you need a way to deal with one of the premier threats in Modern right now.
Yeah. This is also, so one of the things we were kind of counting from these results is there's not a ton of elementals throughout this top 32. And notably, this is the only deck in the top 8 that has Torpor Orb. But I think it was 8 of the 10 decks had in this top 32 had Torpor Orb, and then another 2 had Hushbringer.
Yeah, and 9 decks in this top 8, or in this top 32, excuse me, not in the top 8, had Void Mirror, which isn't lights out against elementals the way that Torpor Orb can be at times, but it's a way to slow the game down to the point where they're actually having to pay 5 mana for Fury or for Solitude, and they're not getting the rebound off Ephemerate and not casting the free spells in the first place to make those Ephemerate turns so devastating. So you do get to slow the elementals deck down that way, and this is a colorless hate piece, which most decks, and not all decks, but most decks can use in the kind of the same vein as Chalice of the Void was against the Cascade decks. That being said, I don't think you can, in a deck with an otherwise weak elementals matchup, I don't think you can sacrifice game 1 and then have a middling game 2 where your hand has a Void Mirror and think, all right, this is what's going to get me back in it, because if you're spending time and a card to cast this hate piece, you are not doing anything to accelerate the game. If anything, you are helping to delay it to the point where casting Fury or casting Solitude and so on and so forth just starts to seem more realistic.
Yeah, I think that Void Mirror just kind of is a happy accident when it's good there, as opposed to covering you against Cascade spells or sort of covering Urza's Tower.
Yeah, and Urza's Tower having another good week here with a mono-green Tron deck supposedly sneaking into this as yet unreported Sunday Challenge top 8. So having a card which, it's kind of weird. If you ask someone to design a hate piece from the ground up that would hit the Tron decks, Elementals, and also the Cascade decks, I don't know how long it would take people to arrive at this exact design, but like this is exactly what it would have to be, right? There's really not much overlap there otherwise.
Yeah, it is. I kind of hope that this was intentional with how much power they put into the incarnations, but who knows? It could just be more Tron hate. On the subject of linear decks sneaking back into top 8s, we see the first Dredge showing up in a while in this top 8. And it's playing Burning Inquiry instead of Thrilling Discovery, which I don't know how good that is or isn't, but it certainly makes the sideboard mulligan decisions a little weirder.
Yeah, I guess if what you need is pure speed, then Inquiry can maximize for that. That being said, I don't know how I would look at this deck's place in the metagame as a whole right now. I guess there isn't really a reason to be playing much hard graveyard hate. You know, if you have your endurances for other reasons, then you have those there. Maybe the way you've chosen to attack specifically Living End as opposed to Footfalls is with Relic of Progenitus or something in that vein. And the Cascade decks are almost priced in to running a card like Leyline of the Void, where they have fewer good sideboard options in general. And if you want to prepare for something like the Living End matchup, then that is an absolute hammer there. So you might be caught by some of that splash damage. But by and large, I think this is a good time to be avoiding hate with your Dredge deck. But even with that in mind, I don't know if the deck is actually powerful enough to get the job done anymore.
Yeah, I think that another thing that didn't get mentioned here is that Pure Steel Paladin is pretty well positioned against Dredge, especially since they're maxing out on Sanctifier and Vex in the sideboard. And this is like a lower point for Paladin as for the last couple weeks, even though it did win the event.
Yeah, I think if you expect a lot of Ragavan and Dragon's Rage channel decks, whether that's Izzet with Motide Region, Rakdos, and we've seen some more experimental lists too, the Grixis decks and the full color decks, which, yes, they do have Kaya's Gull. That's part of the splash here. But if you can fade that, then you seem to be pretty well set up against everything else they have going on. So if you expect to have to wade through a sea of grindy Ragavan decks, then this might be the exact meta call you want. This might be the perfect hard read for that situation.
Well, you talked about Kaya's Guile, but can we talk about Rakdos actually just continuing to win over Grixis? Because I still don't get it.
Yeah, I guess if maybe this is a good response to the question we're posing with our topic this week, the heavier black focus, which you get to do in Rakdos, or I guess Mardu, where that's Rakdos splashing white, as opposed to Grixis, where you have this heavier blue focus. You have Iteration, Drown on the Lock, Snapcaster Mage, maybe some blue cantrips, and so on. At that point, it's quite hard to balance everything you have going on. I don't know if you could play Dauthi Voidwalker and Iteration in the same deck, for example, and hope to get away with that. So that is a vote of confidence in the black cards, I suppose. And so that may be, maybe this topic is a non-starter. Maybe we've answered our own question here.
Yeah, but then again, how good is Dauthi Voidwalker against non-dredge opponents?
I think it's just a good card, right? Like this came up during the preview season where the big debate was, do you need to have a specific use in mind for this card to be good? Or in a deck that can expect to have a ton of cheap discard and removal and so on, is it just a good card in that context? And I think the answer is yes to that. But especially against the Cascade decks where you kind of get to... So against Footfalls, you just, they Footfalls and then you get to Footfalls and you've broken even on that exchange. The interaction with Living End is hilarious, where you have this main deck hate card, and then if they do ever successfully Living End, or they're just forced to Living End to clear out the Voidwalker, then you just get to set up an eventual re-Living End to trump that again on a future turn cycle. So I think if you expect a lot of Cascade decks and then decks working towards some kind of big finish, whatever that is, then Voidwalker just quite naturally lines up well against that. And then the cards that you're surrounding it with tend to be well positioned in those fights too. So I think it's part of this larger package. I don't think you can just put Voidwalker into any black deck, although, as we've discussed, what black decks, and expect to do well. But once you have part of that package, you may as well go all in on that, I think.
Okay, yeah, my experience with Voidwalker has been fairly medium, even against Living End. Living End deck is actually pretty stocked on interaction, and on the draw, I actually had the experience where they would just have cycle 3 times and cast Living End, and that was it. My Voidwalker didn't do anything.
Going back to Asmore for a second, we do in 11th place on Saturday have this, I'm going to say old school at this point, Golgari food deck with Cold and Familiar, Trail of Crumbs. Like, this is a food deck and not just an Asmore deck. And this is a version of this deck that when we spoke to Devin O'Donnell, aka Doomwake, about this archetype, what feels like an eternity ago now, he was already wanting to move past this kind of build and was experimenting with the blue versions that have come into vogue and some other options. But this is old school even by those standards, but good enough to make a surprise reappearance here.
Yeah, I think that this deck is probably really good against like Grixis would be a good reason to turn back to it right now. The Trail of Crumbs, Grixis is not well known for defeating a Trail of Crumbs.
In any format, no.
Trail of Crumbs is quite an Eldraine card. Let's talk about that 9th place here.
Okay, so this Raffo Tapper back once again, sadly not with Timeless Dragon in tow. However, I guess we're trying to complete some kind of challenge here. We've already notched up some finishes with Jeskai control, Esper control, and now we're going full circle around to Ban control. And we even have this Blink sub-theme in this deck with not just Icefang Cradle, which makes a lot of sense in your reactive Ban control deck, but also Solitude and Eternal Witness alongside 2, count them 2, copies of Ephemerate in this main deck.
Well, you only want to draw it sometimes, but it's nice to have the access to wrathing your opponent with Solitude.
See, when you have exactly 2 copies, mathematically, it never really makes sense for them to play around it, and so they won't, and then you always have it, of course, and then they get blown out by it. I think that's how this is meant to work.
Exactly. Again, we still see Cryptic Command getting cut. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Wait, is that a Rimewood Falls? And a Reflecting Pool. Okay, then.
Oh, it sure is.
Oh, and a Glacial Floodplain.
And a Glacial Floodplain as well. Yeah, we don't have a Bant Triumph to cover all our bases here, so we have to get somewhat creative. I do love as well that we managed to sneak 2 copies of Castle Vantress into this deck. So we're smuggling in these snowlands to power up our collateral, but those happen to have basic land types, and so now we get to justify so many non-snowlands because, you know, we have our bases covered elsewhere.
And Flooded Grove. Just I'm that one I'm trying to understand. I don't get Flooded Grove.
Look, As Shoda taught us a decade ago, if you're trying to cast Eternal Witness and Cryptic Command and a third color in the same deck, you need some help. You can't just do that on your own.
Multiple factor fiction. This deck just keeps going. Oh, wow. Okay, then.
Yeah, see, look, when we cut down on Cryptic Command, we didn't add some cheap spells. We just added a different 4-drop to our deck.
Okay, yeah. What's Ray of Revelation for in the sideboard?
It kills Urza Saga, I suppose.
Okay, that's fair. I'll give you that one. I was wondering if we were concerned about Enchantress decks.
I think we're concerned about Blood Moon with our Castle Vantress, Valley Grove, Reflecting Pool, Rhinewood Falls, and the list goes on. We might be concerned about Blood Moon.
Well, you would say that, but there's no forest in the deck.
I guess we're just going to draw it.
And the Plains is in the sideboard.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, we're just going to draw
God, this is... Look, I'm not one to question Rapid Tapper, except when it comes to, choosing to take the play in games of Magic, but I have some questions about one. This might just be a proof that he can literally win with a ham sandwich.
Yeah. Quite interesting. One of the other things, just skimming through the rest of the list that I kind of like this week was the disagreement about which version of Shock to play in the Cascade decks. We see Assault Battery, we see Dead Gone, just no real consensus on which version of 1 mana deal 2 damage to put in the deck.
Yeah, if you want a shock that kills Pure Steel Paladin or Stoneforge Mystic or whatever, and also pitches to Force Vigor, I guess Assault Battery is doing double duty there.
Well, you're just saying no one made the elephant?
I mean, you can... Do you want to make a 3/3 elephant for 4 mana? Or do you want to make 2 4/4 rhinos for 3 mana?
Well, sometimes you've already made the rhinos and you need an elephant to complete the zoo.
Yeah, just get the whole menagerie back together.
Yeah, I don't have strong opinions. I just really like seeing Assault Battery show up again.
I mean, it is adorable in one sense, but it's also, on some aesthetic level, it's kind of offensive that we're seeing all of these various multicolored cards, and the priority use case for all of these is, well, these happen to be in the 2 right colors to pitch my 2 different pitch spells. It's and look, it's the pitch spells that are the problem there. I'm not casting blame on a poor Assault Battery finally getting its day in the sun. But I don't know. It feels like a sign of the times.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a good thing for the format that people are incentivized to play with arbitrary cards with colors. But the pitch cards are a lot. So
yeah. It's a whole lot. So rounding out this challenge, we have we've mentioned the Asmol decks. Not too much outside of that. We do have the return of Yawgmoth, which went from being one of the consensus top decks, it felt like, to mostly disappearing, but returning here with the addition of Prosperous Innkeeper. And this is a card which has almost single-handedly caused a resurgence in the Jund Bolus Citadel deck in Pioneer and Historic, where that card is a card that really helps you jump up to the Citadel by virtue of the treasure token being ramp that sticks around through removal on the Innkeeper, and then the Innkeeper itself is a 1 body to sacrifice to your Priest of Forgotten Gods or any of the other sacrifice outlets in the deck. And here in Modern, you actually highlighted this during the AFR preview season as a card which maybe doesn't have an obvious home yet, but has some unique applications that are worth finding a way for future reference. And this may be the time to dust that one off.
It is arbitrary pieces of cardboard. It's really good if you're interested in a little bit of game object tribal or just maybe a lot of it.
Yeah, I think it has a unique use case in the Yawgmoth deck and also in the Heliod deck, actually. It's another one of these creature engine cards almost that has an interesting crossover there. But in Yawgmoth, I know you mentioned Essence Warden as a subtly important card to earlier versions of the Yawgmoth deck. And this is a more expensive Essence Warden, and the 1 mana, I think, does make a difference there. But when it comes to ramping you up to Yawgmoth, this does that through, Unholy Heat on your Innkeeper. And then this is a 2-drop that you can evolution into Yawgmoth, or this is 2 things towards a Court of Calling if you're looking to up the value of X there. And then once you're going off, every persist loop, you're gaining back the life that you spend. And so if you have Geralt's Messenger, then that's a done deal right there. Even if you don't, you can just loop your persist creatures with the Yawgmoth, draw through your deck, stay neutral on life, and find the pieces that you need to finish things off. So there's no one use where it's, okay, this card is bringing back Yawgmoth by itself, but as part of a total package, I think this is a really nice pickup there.
You missed one of the most important parts. It's mana fixing in your green, black deck. Or sorry, green.
Yes. Well, not to give up the fight in this episode, trying to find uses for black cards in Modern. I've been wondering if the next step in Yawgmoth is moving away from the triple black card, which makes you just a more efficient deck on the whole, but also has the advantage of declunking your mana base. You no longer have to worry about those double green into triple black requirements, and you can play a more sane and rational mana base there.
I don't think you can cut Messenger because of how smoothly it actually turns the combo into a kill. If anything, I'd be moving away from Strangle Rootgeist or the other double green cards. And I think, I guess we had a topic we want to talk about, but we can take it as an aside here. Champion of the Parish. This was a card previewed from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. It is, if you haven't seen it or you heard me wrong, it's exactly what you think it is. It's Champion of the Parish, but it costs a black and it's for zombies. That's it. That's what the card does.
That's the joke. Yeah, it's very much in the vein of these MH2 designs of a top-down design based around wordplay, and then we just let it go from there. This one was kind of a layup. This one was pretty easy to fill in the rest of the card after that point. But yeah, this is a really exciting card, which I don't know if Zombies has what it takes to be a viable tribe in Modern, but it feels like it's always just been on the precipice and been missing one or two cards to tie the room together. And I think this could be it. So the question for me is not, am I excited to try and make this card work? Because yes, I am. But do I want to be some kind of aggro deck here, maybe with some disruption peppered in, we're in the colors of Thoughtseize and Fatal Push and so on? Or do I want to be some weird like aggro combo deck where I know way back when, as Pioneer was being introduced for the first time, you wrote about this zombie rally deck in that format. And in Modern, you have a lot of stuff working towards the same goals, but also stuff like Carrion Feeder and a bunch more zombies and just a lot of tools there to fill it out. And you can pretty reliably make a rally for one, whether that's on turn 3 or later, into a lethal card. So that by itself is a big draw, but I don't know if that's almost a trap that's distracting from just the solid mono black zombie core.
So I actually submitted my article about this for the week. This card is pretty awesome. I'm actually excited about it in basically every format that is being played right now. And I think that when it comes to Modern, I don't think you can make a pure aggro deck. I think it's just like if Merfolk isn't working, I don't think you can make a different tribe work under the same principles. I think it's just too much to ask to like, I'm going to be an aggro deck against Dragon's Rage Channeler and Unholy Heat. Great job. Like you're just going to lose your important creature for 1 mana and the game is going to end. I think you need to be doing something combo engine-y. And the reason I brought this up right now is that the deck I immediately thought of is that there's another zombie with Undying. It's Butcher Ghoul. It's just 1 in a black, 1/1 Undying. So my immediate thought was that this would be a way to move Yawgmoth out of the green cards. And the list I submitted was actually splashing red for Impure. It was Imperial Recruiter as the tutor shell, Ether Vial, and then also bringing up some of the Goblin Bombardment stuff from Sam Black's whatever year that was. He top-8'd a Legacy Grand Prix with some Gravecrawler Goblin Bombardment stuff.
Yeah, that all sounds really exciting to me. And this may finally be that fair-ish, I suppose, Yawgmoth deck that I had mentioned wanting to build around during the preview season. So yeah, you have a lot of the sacrifice stuff going on. Carrion Feeder as one of the, I'm not going to say unsung heroes, I think that's the wrong way to put it from MH1, but when we think about what made the first builds of Hogak work, and then the second builds of Hogak, which never should have existed, but they dropped the ball the first time. You could argue they dropped the ball with the first builds of Hogak too, but a story for another time. I think Carrion Feeder is an underrated piece of that puzzle in terms of how important it was to those shells. And before MH1, I was thinking the Bridgevine deck or some kind of recursive sacrifice aggro deck, if it had exactly Carrion Feeder, that would be enough to get me interested. And now we have exactly Carrion Feeder, along with all of this other stuff that's joined the format in the meantime. As for the pure aggro idea, that question of why this over Merfolk, let's say, when you compare those different tribal decks in Modern, you have humans and spirits off in their own corner where you have a lot of disruption and it's stapled to the creatures themselves. And then you have, I guess, elves where you maybe have the most explosive potential, but you're not really doing anything. You're just dumping a bunch of power onto the board. And then Merfolk sits kind of somewhere in between there where your creatures themselves are just pumping each other, but you're in blue. So if you want to load up on Force Negations and Chalice of the Void and so on, you can do that. And yeah, I think zombies, of all of those different tribal archetypes, I think Merfolk might be the closest comparison. That being said, if the issue is tribal as a concept in a format of Unholy Heat, I think zombies is the best tribe of all of those at fighting through a bunch of point-and-click removal, because you have grave crawlers, you have other recursive threats, you have stuff like Undead Augur, where you're getting paid for your stuff dying, you're in the right colors for Lurrus if you want that, and I guess there's a question there of, are there good 3-drops that Lurrus competes with, like Grouse Messenger or some of these lords like Diagraph Captain or something? Lurrus is so good that I have to imagine you just want to stay there, but I guess that's a discussion you can have. And then once you have your Ether Vial, Cavern of Souls, you have, I think, 16 good 1-drops by my count now. You've got the new champion, Carrion Feeder, Gravecrawler, and then Cryptbreaker. That's a solid core of 16. And then if you have interest in any like Stitcher Supplier or Shambling Gas kind of nonsense, you can load up there too. So it seems like you have the density of cheap creatures, you have a good interaction, you have the ability to fight through interaction if you want it, and then whatever else you want to finish that out with. It seems like the ingredients are there.
I think that without any kind of like mass pump effect, I think your per card rate is just really low for Modern. Though I guess we should talk also about the Shambling Gas Combo too, because that's pretty easy to pull off in Modern.
Sure. So this is, I'm assuming you're meaning Liliana Untouched by Death and not another Shambling Gas Combo, which I'm about to learn about.
No, that's the exact one. That's the Liliana Untouched by Death, the M19 Liliana that has the -3 to like better Yogg Will your zombies that just lets you keep casting Shambling Gas. One of the issues there is that you don't really have a way to convert your Ghast into something direct necessarily, but like Champion of the Perished is a way to create another infinitely large thing as you're looping through.
It is. I guess the issue there is if you're sacrificing your Ghast for some kind of payoff, you have that free outlet. It's going to be something like a Goblin Bombardment, a Altar of Dementia, a Carrion Feeder, where you already are getting some kind of infinitely scaling thing. And I guess if it's Carrion Feeder, then having two big things means you can get through blockers more easily. But I don't think that moves the needle in terms of making that combo easier to execute. It might just mean that you have a better beatdown plan in the games where the combo doesn't come together.
Yeah, I was mostly thinking the case of having two infinite power attackers. Or I guess I kind of had some bleed through of the historic setup where your Ghast becomes like a negative power creature perpetually. Don't worry about it. We're not gonna we're gonna perpetually ignore that.
Yes, I see my article this week if you don't want to ignore that one and you have to suffer through any historic anytime soon. But yeah, it sounds like there are quite a few options for how to build this, and something in that space seems quite reasonable to me. And it may be that if the format moves back to this place where it's super hostile to creatures and fury and solitude and all of this nonsense everywhere, then you have to keep that on the back burner for now. But I'm excited to explore this space, and I'm sad that I'm going to have to wait another few months to do it, because this is our first look at one of the two Innistrad sets, but that's not going to hit the shelves for another few months yet.
Yeah. So stepping back out of that aside, anything else you see from the challenge that you find worth mentioning? Skimming through, not really a ton of new stuff. This week was pretty light on the nonsense.
Yeah, and then in the Sunday challenge, the decks that we know about are 3 Cascade decks and Mono Green Tron. So make of that what you will. One of the unknown members in the top 8, Chinico Bono, was recently seen 5-0ing a league with Hardened Scale. So it would be nice to see that deck back on the map, even though I guess I'm not sure what advantages that would have over Hammer Time at this point, unless you think the format is in a place where Walking Ballista is really good, which I think is good. I don't think it's good enough to justify taking the hits across the board elsewhere.
There was a copy of Goblin Bombardment in the top 32 Hardened Scales list from Saturday. So some more Walking Ballista style stuff.
Yeah, this was Mr. Seri MTG, who plays a lot of Hardened Scales and was glad to see that deck on the map in week 1. And yeah, if you think that, I guess if you're Mr. Seri, you are playing this deck because it's Hardened Scales and you love Hardened Scales, and that's fine, that's valid. However, if you're playing this deck because you think Walking Ballista is really good, then I guess it stands to reason that Goblin Bombardment would be really good too, right?
Potentially. I don't. It's kind of interesting to compare that to Arcbound Ravager, or maybe you just want more Arcbound Ravagers in a similar kind of space.
Yeah, and I guess you have some redundancy via Ancient Stirrings. That actually may be the subtle case for Hardened Scales, is that if you have good colorless hate cards, whether it's Void Mirror, Chalice of the Void, Relic of Progenitors, which I think is at its best right now, then you have, if it's Relic, you also have Urza Saga looking for those. But in this deck, Ancient Stirrings just giving you that redundancy where you can keep a hand without one of those hate cards and still have access to it a decent amount of the time.
Yeah, I don't know if this deck is. I don't know how much you even want to play that way in 2021, to be honest.
What way is that?
Just like the sketchy. I think if you have a hate card in your deck, I don't know. It's just kind of how, like, I don't think the idea of keeping a hand that's good enough and then ending up on a hate card is great. Or like, I think that the role of hate cards is kind of just like pushing your matchup a couple percentage either way, unless your opponent's deck is like one of the really, really linears.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it's you can't really afford to skimp on copies of these cards because, I have Ancient Stirrings. You kind of have to play the amount that you were going to play regardless, and then hope that Ancient Stirrings in the games where you don't have those just acts as some kind of backup consistency there.
Kind of. I think it's mostly that I don't trust that the Hardened Scales deck is within the percentages of those fixing the matchups that they're trying to fix. It's really tough with the linear decks kind of becoming, we talked about this in the combo episode. The true linear decks that were like a hate card is going to be lights out are gone pretty much just due to the quality increase in the format. And it's just like relying on the binary aspect of hate cards. Like, you can't really mull to your hate cards to beat most decks. Like, the Cascade decks will just Brazen Borrower their way out of it. And you can't so that basically means you end up in all these matchups where if you draw a hate card, that's nice. But if you only have 2 of it, you're like playing 75% of your post-board games without one. And those still have to be acceptable options. Like, you can't just be like, 25% of the time it's great, and 75% of the time it's as bad as game 1. Like, that's not a winning proposition.
Yeah, it may actually be in the same space as these aggressive zombie decks that we're talking about, to find a read across there, where your raw Goldfish speed isn't actually fast enough to keep up with the focused linear decks, but you're also not interactive enough that, maybe some games you draw your one Thoughtseize and that's, okay, well, is that actually going to be good enough against your opponent a reasonable amount of the time? So you kind of have to either lean into the speed or into the interaction, or both, I suppose. But if you can crack that code, then you've probably got a great deck on your hands. And it feels like just kind of being mediocre at both ends of that isn't where you want to be.
Yeah, it's just it's too much to ask to be mediocre at both sides of that when someone can just have Dragon Ray Channeler and Unholy Heat and just be good at both sides of that.
And speaking of being mediocre at everything, we will be back to talk about the role of Black in Modern after a short break.
The SCG Tour Online is back. Starting Friday, July 23rd, you can play the best events in competitive Magic for thousands of dollars in cash prizes, piles of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena qualifier invitations to skip that mythic grind, and at the very top, invitations to the MTG Arena Championships and the StarCityGames.com Invitational returning to Roanoke, Virginia from October 29th to October 31st. You heard that right. The SCG Invitational is also back. And you know the best place to qualify for it? That's right, the SCG Tour Online. Check out starcitygames.com/SCG Tour Online to register for events, see upcoming event schedules, and get all the details on how you can earn prizes and invitations playing the SCG Tour Online.
All right, so let's dive into our main topic here, which is, why do the black cards all suck, Ari?
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny to say this because, like, there's this idea of Modern that was like the old Modern, like there was a long period where black was the best color by a lot, and it's not that distant from where we're at. Like 2017, like that entire year, black was the best color in Modern by a lot, and there were 3 different pillars that kind of kept it up. But I think they've all just kind of gotten bad.
So those would be Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, and then filling in a blank here with Death Shadow, kind of.
Yeah, I think Death Shadow and Angler. Like, black had the best efficient threats, it had the best removal spell, and it had the best non-creature interaction in the format. And I guess we should start in probably that order. So I think Death Shadow is one of the cards that got hit the hardest by Modern Horizons 2. Some pretty straightforward issues. One, Solitude. Just that lineup is so bad.
Yeah, that is just embarrassing on the face of it. And the fact that Solitude actually dodges Inquisition of Kozilek is just the cherry on top there.
Yeah, well, there's half of that, and it's half of, like, not only is Solitude just good against Death Shadow, like, Solitude as a 5-mana spell is fundamentally good against the Death Shadow decks, and then it's also a piece of cheap interaction that is crushing against the Death Shadow strategy.
And then also, as we've had more of these hyper-efficient threats, we mentioned as Channeler and Ragavan started to make their mark in the format that you can incorporate those into some kind of shadow deck where now you have all of the best cheap threats and you really lean hard on that angle. But you can also just play a Rados deck that doesn't have to find these roundabout ways to deal itself 10 damage every game. You can just play the good cards and the good interaction, and that is good enough, as these challenge results seem to indicate. You don't have to jump through these hoops for what is no longer the biggest and baddest threat in the format.
Yeah, and also Channeler is like another huge issue for the card Death Shadow. It's really hard to put yourself at 9 life against Channeler. Like, that's just going to lead to you losing a lot of games.
As a quick real-time update here for the Sunday Modern Challenge, whose results have just been posted, I said 1 copy of Monograin-tron. Make that 3 copies of Monograin-tron. So worth taking a brief sidebar to maybe offer some commentary on that one.
Yeah, Tron has been picking back up. I think we talked about this last week with it picking back up and the 4-color decks being a big part of that. I think it's still kind of continuing that exploit trend. And I think notably there's a lot less of the 4-color decks this week as a result of them being specifically preyed upon. You were right, 3 Cascade decks in this top 8. There is a black-white Grief deck, and we will be talking about Grief's role in Modern in a bit here. But yeah, again, in a hammer to round it out. But yeah, another top 8 without a lot of black cards and a lot more colorless cards than black cards.
Mm-hmm. So returning to our focus here, Death Shadow, when it was joined by Scourge of the Skyclaves, it seemed like that pairing, those 2 partners in crime, were going to do a lot of good work together. And in the Strixhaven Modern format, that was one of the best decks at various points, with Heliod doing good work in throttling that to some extent. But in terms of just the raw power in the format, I think John Death Shadow or Rados Death Shadow, we started to see towards the end, something in that space was one of the better decks in Modern. So we're not talking about ancient history here. It's not only May of 2017. It's May of 2021 potentially.
Yeah. Solitude, that's an issue. Getting clocked back and having other threats be as good as an issue. And I guess we can start talking about Fatal Push too, because Prismatic Ending has been a huge issue there too.
Yeah, Prismatic Ending and Unholy Heat, where the printing of Fatal Push, that's when we started to see this new crop of more interactive Death Shadow decks start to pop up. And the timeline there is a little wonky, where you started to see the prototype for that before Fatal Push was printed, before the ban of Gataxian Probe and so on. But it was only when Probe was banned and Push was printed, that the format moved to a place where suddenly this way of building the deck became the consensus way to do it. And I remember when Sam and Jerry and so on just took that GP in Vancouver by storm with the deck. It seemed like this deck is, the format adapted and there are cards in the modern card pool that let you do that. But in terms of just fundamentally good, solid Magic, there was nothing that could really compete on the same level as the John Shadow deck at that time. And I think Fatal Push was a big part of that.
Yeah, nothing actually competed with it until the printing of Unclaimed Territory, I think that entire year, it was really just decks that maybe beat Death Shadow some percentage of the time, losing to Death Shadow most of the time until Humans came about. And Fatal Push was a big part of that. But now, for the same amount of mana, you get a lot of the utility of Fatal Push and then more. Fatal Push is not an exclusive card the way it was before. It used to be Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, Fatal Push. And Modern Horizons brought us Unholy Heat, Prismatic Ending, Fury, and Solitude in this same realm of cheap interaction. None of those are black cards, so Fatal Push isn't getting any help. And a lot of those are doing things beyond just killing a creature. It's really hard to put Fatal Push in your deck when Prismatic Ending is fighting for the same space, but also Fatal Push can't kill a Planeswalker. So it's really, you end up in these spots where Fatal Push doesn't kill Murktide Regent or Wrenn and Six. That's really bad.
And some of those cards that conveniently dodge Prismatic Ending accidentally dodge Fatal Push in the same way. So your Murktide Regent is not vulnerable to Prismatic Ending, which is a big concern right now. But if Fatal Push does pop up again, that is a big mark against Fatal Push. And likewise, the Elementals deck, you can't Prismatic Ending a Fury, or I guess you can technically, but it's a lot of work. You cannot Fatal Push a Fury no matter what you do. If that thing is hardcast or cheated into play and then ephemerated to stick around. And if anything, the fact that Fatal Push cannot break up those ephemerate chains with those specific cards is, makes those matchups even more of an uphill struggle. But returning to that template from a few years ago, with the Shadow decks, you had the best threats in black, the best interaction in Fatal Push in black, and then not just the best hand disruption, but this is a unique form of interaction, right, in Thoughtseize, which only black had access to. And all of those were clustered in the same color there. And you saw a similar thing in Legacy and have seen it for, time immemorial now, where the Delver decks have the best card draw and manipulation. They have the best cheap threats, and whatever secondary color they play gives them the best removal to go along with the best interaction in Force of Will and Daze and so on. And once you get a single color just winning all of those wars at the same time, that is a recipe for a truly dominant strategy. And every single one of those pillars has fallen away at this point. And Thoughtseize, there's still no card in the format that does what Thoughtseize or Inquisition or Grief now can do for you. But the utility of those effects as a broad class has also diminished. And that point is worth getting onto in a second here.
Yeah, how much of this do we want to point at another black card? Because how much of this is Lurrus?
Yeah, so Lurrus is a weird double-edged sword for Black in Modern, where it is one of the main reasons to be playing Black in Modern, right? Especially in these Rakdos, hyper-efficient Ragavan DRC shells. But it's also one of the best cards against those decks. And, trying to Thoughtseize an opponent who starts with an 8th virtual card in hand, which you can't actually Thoughtseize right away, which in turn is going to lead to potentially a 9th card or more if they can find a way to protect it. That is just a losing proposition on the face of it. You need something else to swing that battle in your favor. And so that game of I'm going to trade 1-for-1 with you, and then when the dust settles, my one Tarmogoyf as the thing left standing is going to get the job done. That just fundamentally doesn't work in a game that has companions in it.
Yeah, and also there's just this issue of Lurrus leads to these longer games. You don't want to be drawing an Inquisition on turn 9.
Right. And it's, Thoughtseize was maybe the worst there's ever been in the format in the days of the initial companion rule, where, Lurrus was just leaping directly into play and undoing all of the work that your Thoughtseize had done previously. Now there is at least a window where they have to often spend a turn putting Lurrus in their hand, and you have this one turn maybe to get it out of their hand with the discard spell that you've been saving up. But even that is, you need to time that perfectly, and often you can't sit around with a somewhat dead card in your hand just waiting for that thing to become relevant.
Yeah, and they can just wait. Like, if they think you're waiting, they can wait and then just play the Lurrus and play a Mishra's Bauble. And also, like, this Mishra's Bauble plays a little bit into this in general because it lets you sort of evade Thoughtseize timing with top decks. Not like the most, but enough. And I think the other thing that's really important in this discussion is that alongside Lurrus, there's a redundancy of 1-mana threats, and that is really where Thoughtseize has failed. Like, that's where Thoughtseize started failing in the Death Shadow era, which is when humans started showing up and you would Thoughtseize them, and their entire hand was cards that cost 1 and 2 that you needed to take on the spot, and they just spend their mana on their turn and be totally fine. Your opponent, like, you go turn 1 Thoughtseize and they're like Ragavan or Channeler, or you're already behind the gun against a Ragavan. You just don't, it doesn't work the way you want it to.
Yeah, I think also just in the most big picture sense possible here, the cards are also good now, right? Like, it used to be that if you were trying to build whatever archetype it was in Modern, then you would have some cards that were the big draw to that strategy, and then you would have to make up the numbers with a few kind of middling cards, which they did their job, but they weren't the best at that role. And so if you could Thoughtseize the top of their range and leave them with the middle, then that exchange favored you. And now just all the cards are bangers, right? You Thoughtseize them, that you take a card, and the rest of the hand is going to beat you, unless you have something else going on. So that idea of like punching a hole in your opponent's hand and making your interaction and threats line up the right way against theirs is much harder when just like everything kills everything, and also everything needs to be killed, or it runs away with the game by itself.
Yeah, and there's also just the drop-off of decks that rely on a single major card. There's not like, oh, I'll Thoughtseize you and take your Primeval Titan, and then like you have a bunch of mana and maybe I can get out of it. It's like, no, I'll Thoughtseize you, I'll take your Violent Outburst. If you ever draw another Violent Outburst, all my stuff dies because you make a bunch of rhinos. But then also every card in your hand is also Cryptic Command somehow. Like, it doesn't work out.
Yeah, the linear decks, for the most part, are these one-card combo decks, right? Where even using Primeval Titan as an example, that was the common play pattern against decks like Valakut or Amulet Titan, is you would Thoughtseize their one payoff card, and they were drawing to, 9 to 10 outs to just win the game on the spot. And you had to apply pressure, which you can do now, admittedly. And I think that's where Thoughtseize, in one sense, has improved in the past year or so, is that it used to be, all right, you Thoughtseize them, but you didn't have the other half of that recipe, which is closing down the number of draw sets they had to recover that card. Now you can do that, right? Because when you're casting your Thoughtseize, you're surveilling one with your Channeler, and you're putting a card in your graveyard, and you're attacking for 3, and that's a substantial clock by itself. So in that sense, that may be why the successful model for Thoughtseize decks has moved to be this like Rakdos Lurrus show, where you have the super cheap threats that can apply pressure and get backed up by discard and removal. But yeah, the linear decks are, Charlotte's Agent, Violent Outburst, where they just need to draw one of those cards at any point. And that hidden card effect that you mentioned with Mishra's Bauble is kind of in play, especially with Living End, right? Where it is very plausible. They just keep a hand that's 3 lands, 1 interactive card, and 3 cyclers. And what is Thoughtseize meant to do against that hand exactly?
Yeah, that matchup has always been a problem for Thoughtseize. The Thoughtseize decks used to be able to get a little better side of it, but I think that the mono blue lists have just gotten, there's like the condensing of the costs and just like better cards. Like, compare like Monstrous Carabid versus like Curator of Mysteries. Just like look at that comparison and think about how much better it is to, like, if you have to Living End 2 or 3 things back, how much better off you're going to be, because your opponent can't just like Tarmogoyf. Your thing dies because it attacks. Good luck.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it seems like if Fatal Push is worse than it used to be, Thoughtseize is worse than it used to be. And I guess as a sidebar on that, Inquisition of Kozilek being worse than it used to be, I mean, it's in some sense it's better because all the threats are so cheap now. But there is this new class of threats which technically costs 5 or 7, but actually costs 2 or 1 or 2 mana. And Inquisition missing those is a big deal. And then if stuff like Primeval Titan or Khan Liberated now works its way back into the equation, having a discard spell that is hit or miss against those is not a great place to be either. So usually, like, if you're a Thoughtseize deck, you want to be either able to Inquisition them to know how to deploy your Thoughtseize later and when you need to time it, or you just hit them with a barrage of discard spells and then their hand is wrecked and the one thing that you have left probably is enough now to clean up from there. And so I think if Inquisition isn't as good, then Thoughtseize isn't as good anymore, and vice versa. But then those two pillars have been weakened, and then this third pillar of this one moment where black had the best threats, now I guess it's red that has the best threats and the best removal and everything else, or you can make a case for blue with Murktide Regent in the mix. So I'm not quite sure what black's unique selling point is meant to be in this format anymore.
Yeah, I think we can get to some of the stuff in a minute that it does well, because there's some things it does well that I think people need to focus on a little more. But one of the things also, we had mentioned black as part of the Yawgmoth decks. I think there's another uphill battle, which is like a lot of the black threats are really bad against Unholy.
Yeah, so it used to be that if you had a 5/5 or 6/6 Death Shadow or Scourge of the Skyclaves, that was effectively unkillable by a lot of the red decks, or at the very least, they would need two specific cards and they would have to use those cards, and then you were up in that exchange, even in the rare event that it happened. But now, killing these large creatures is trivial. You know, we've seen Primeval Titan effectively driven out of the format because, that one used to line up very well against Fatal Push, among other things. But now all of those same decks can just swat it away with Unholy Heat. And that's a problem, certainly for Primeval Titan, but also for any of the good black threats that you might want to play instead.
Yeah, and then I think the last issue worth mentioning, just for the entire color, we've talked about a lot of things that are like trading or like big creatures. Have you ever tried to do any of that against an Urza Saga?
Oh, it doesn't work. Absolutely impossible. Yeah. It doesn't help that currently the best Urza Saga deck is also a Lurrus deck, where you get screwed on both halves of that equation. But yeah, Urza Saga is just, and the fact that, again, you can't Thoughtseize that, you can't Inquisition that, and in those early days of MH2 testing with Amulet Titan, I would play against some of these brave souls busting out their Jund decks once again, and they would have a handful of discard spells and you would just win single-handedly with Urza Saga because they'd effectively mulliganed several times, nothing else mattered, and this one card was going to translate into two good threats and a new card by itself.
Yeah, I like how it's like we're just talking about Urza Saga beating these decks, and we're not even talking about like people just don't even play the Expedition map anymore. Just not even needed.
Yeah, the first one's going to do it, so why bother? Which I guess maybe it's a case for the Expedition map, right? If the first Urza Saga is going to get them dead. But yeah, you mentioned earlier when discussing Dredge, Sanctifier in Vec as well shouldn't be overlooked as a card which, certainly if you're trying to do anything unfair in black, that card is probably great against you. And then if you're trying to attack on the ground with black creatures, well, Sanctifier is still very good against you. And so having this is not main deckable quite, but the fact that it slots so effortlessly into the sideboards of the hammer decks, of any white creature deck, effectively. Oriel Champion kind of did the same thing before, but depending on what you're trying to do, this card is just on another level.
Yeah, I think Champion, it didn't cut off your ability to go over the top of a single 2/2 protection in the same way that cutting off graveyards does.
Right, and usually if you were trying to invalidate an Oriel Champion in some way, some part of that might involve the graveyard, right? It's bringing a threat back, it's recurring a removal spell, it's, you would pick up your Lurrus and play your Lurrus and get your other thing back and try and go around it somehow. And Sanctifier just invalidates all of that by itself.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot. It's a lot of angles being covered at once. Is there anything else you want to talk about why black is not good right now? Anything that we missed in covering, like its best cards being bad and suffering on many other angles?
As if that wasn't enough. I think that covers why black is suffering right now. We'll take a short break and we'll come back with what black does have going for it, however long that list is. Alright folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about Scg Premium, and for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paolo Vido Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions from Jerry Thompson to Autumn Burchett? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black, and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium. All right, so this may end up being a short segment. I guess we'll find out here. What does Black have going for it in Modern? If you are someone who loves to sleeve up a basic swamp, what can you cling to as a consolation here?
I mean, the obvious one is Lurrus of the Dream Den plus Kolaghan's Command. I think that being able to cast your Lurrus and then cast it again is by far the best thing that Black is doing in Modern right now.
Yeah, we haven't seen much in the space of like unearth my Lurrus, but that's an option you have too. It does play into some of the same stuff like Sanctifier, the haste on Graveyard Recursion. But if you want to really lean hard into Lurrus and build a dedicated Lurrus deck, Black tends to be one of the better colors for doing that. If Lurrus, I think if we woke up tomorrow and Companions had been axed from Magic, I think on balance that would be a boon to Black, just because you can find other ways to do similar things in Black, kind of, but it offers a unique dimension to the other decks that play Lurrus, where they now have this super weapon they can use against you. Hypothetically, if that were to happen, one of the decks that I was looking at during the previous season was Grief and Fury in conjunction with like Kolaghan's Command and Croxer and some of these other good black and red threats. And I think a package like that is somewhat interesting, but it's so hard to justify in a world where, I could just cut all of this stuff and be playing Lurrus instead. And that tension that we mentioned way back when of Grief versus Lurrus potentially coming up, it seems like that has fallen definitively in favor of Lurrus for the decks that you have that choice.
I think in that hypothetical world, people would just put Lurrus in their deck as a creature.
Oh, so if you couldn't have it as a companion, but you just get to pay 3 mana for Lurrus? Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't think it's a lot to ask. Like, you would just put that, like, you would play Mishra's Bauble, you'd put that card in your deck. It would pitch to the two. I mean, I don't know. Have we talked about this a little bit? The fact that Lurrus pitches to Solitude and Grief. I don't think there's been a deck that does that right, but like it does. It's kind of wild that just like Lurrus as a card would probably be Modern playable.
Oh, I think it absolutely would. Yeah, that's kind of scary to think about actually. But yeah, I think Lurrus is, for now and until something happens too new to Lurrus once again, that is going to be a main sticking point here. But while we live in that world, if you want to play Black, Lurrus is a very good reason to do that. We were, I'm not going to say doomsaying about Grief during the previous season, but we were certainly very high on it, and it's still a fantastic Magic card that's looking for the right home. Is it just a case of waiting for that home to emerge, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big issue with Grief, and everyone cited this in preview season, and I thought that the card would be stupid enough to kind of override it, but the issue is that the black cards are all bad. If you play Grief, you have to play with black cards. And those two things don't mesh well with each other. It's really hard to play bad cards to support your good card. That said, Grief did just win the challenge because it's pitching Architects of Will. So maybe we'll just keep seeing that until good black cards get printed. I think it's a definite reason to play the color. But I think that it's kind of hit this role of like, you're trying to play as little black as possible while still playing Grief.
So I think that covers a lot of the fair applications. I guess we could touch on Smallpox quickly, which shows up from time to time in the challenge lists, in the league deck list dumps. That's a card which I have trouble wrapping my head around conceptually, because I'm not sure if it gets a lot better or a lot worse in a format where all of the cards are hyper efficient and you can expect your opponent to, be playing a land, be playing a 1-drop on turn 1 with increased consistency.
Yeah, I that card's been really good for me every time I've cast it recently. Again, it has the same grief problem of like, what are the other cards you want to play with Smallpox?
Yeah, I guess Lingering Souls doesn't really cut it anymore. Some like mopey Bloodghast shenanigans isn't getting it done either. So you need to find a reason to do that. I guess, could you hybridize this with some of the Reanimator stuff maybe? Like have this as your discard outlet?
I've thought about that. I think it's pretty good. I think that Archon of Cruelty is powerful enough to be worth reanimating. My issue with all this is that you need to find the right weekend against the hate cards. It's sort of the Dredge problem, but not quite. I think, so specifically, like, you cannot be playing I think that playing this deck, you don't have a lot of inherently good ways to interact with Relic and Cage. It's really hard to interact with like the permanents and any kind of good way in like you don't have like a natural thing like Brazen Borrower that just kind of is a normal interactive spell. You have to go to something like Vindicate, which is just not the right for the format. I guess Prismatic Ending, maybe that's the thing that these decks didn't have to tie everything together.
Yeah, this was the approach that Kellen Pastor took, where he had Prismatic Endings in the sideboard, and then also this Stoneforge Mystic transformational package, where once you're doing that, sometimes even if they have the removal spell for the Stoneforge Mystic, and this is once again where, right, the fact that Fatal Push kills Stoneforge Mystic would not kill Archon of Cruelty or Ashen Rider or whatever your big thing is. And so if those were Fatal Pushes, in the dark, those probably are coming out of the deck. When it's Unholy Heat, which just effortlessly kills Archon of Cruelty and whatever else, you're leaving those in anyway because those are good cards, and those incidentally are going to attack the Stoneforge Mystic. But it's nice that you have the grief stuff to back that up and clear the way. You have, in Kellen's deck, you have like Ephemerate and Manacare Rebirth to maybe rebuy the Mystic through that. And then also sometimes, you persist back your Stoneforge Mystic and okay, it's an 0-1, but that's fine. That you're not planning to attack with it anyway.
Yeah, I think this deck in general is close, but I might have to put some reps into it to figure it out. I tried it before, and I have all the cards on my account just sitting there. It's really tempting now that we're talking about it.
This was one idea I saw during the preview season, I think, but combining the Asmo stuff with Reanimator, where Cookbook is, a nice discard outlet to set up the Archon of Cruelty being persisted on turn 2. And I think there is actually a big difference, especially on the draw, between Archon of Cruelty on turn 2 and Archon of Cruelty on turn 3. Like the turn 2 one just feels so much more unassailable a lot of the time. But you have all of that stuff. You have Asmo, which in theory can play something of a fair game. Unmarked Grave can fetch Oval Chase Daredevil, where you don't have to play too many of those now because you can directly tutor that into the graveyard. And then just being an Urza Saga deck, that is the backup plan sometimes, right? You just grief them once, or you do something else. They effectively mulligan because they drew a Graphic Cage, and you just get to beat them down with some constructs.
I like Saga as a backup plan. There's a few things I don't like about the Asmore stuff. One is that I would really love if my Persist could bring back Asmore, and it cannot. And then the other is, so I think it is a tough ask to put like your own griefs into an Asmore deck like this. Just as like the one-shot discard. I really want them with Ephemerate in this shell as another plan. You mentioned this turn 2 versus turn 3 Archon thing. I think that Ephemerate is one of the things that tries to tie that together. Because if you turn 3 Archon with an Ephemerate up, it always is enough.
Yeah, and I know Kellen specifically mentioned that interaction as doing a lot of good work there.
Yeah, it might be worth exploring Urza Saga with these cards. I don't know if Asmore's involved or whether you just want to Saga people, but I like some of this, but not all of it.
Maybe we move away from all of this specific stuff and just try to find a black Urza Saga deck where I think the interaction, like Thoughtseize, is good when, if you're mapping out your future Saga turns, right? Ideally, you want to activate Saga on turn 3, activate again on turn 4 and find something. And so you want to front load most of your interactive stuff. You don't want it to be reactive and competing for your mana on those same turns. And so if you get to go, Thoughtseize into a 2-drop into Urza Saga, then that's a much smoother sequence that's more conducive to what you want to do. I just don't know what the rest of that deck would actually look like.
Yeah, maybe this is just like a reworking of the Asmore decks if you're going down this road, because those are the natural homes for Saga plus black cards.
It could be the Lurrus Rock deck, or the Saga Rock deck, excuse me, which I guess this could also be a Lurrus deck that we saw pop up a little bit, where, as a Saga boosting Tarmogoyf is somewhat of a real thing, or Traverse if you really want to go deep down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't like any of the rock cards. I just don't. I don't like them.
I just want to Shadow Spirit Tarmogoyf. That's good, honest living.
It is, but you could. When are you having a Shadow Spear and you don't have a construct? Not often.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Let's move away from good, clean, honest living for a second. Let's talk about the unfair things you might want to do with black, because we did pick up Profane Tutor in this set, and that is very good at enabling all manner of these turn 4 combo decks. So Ad Nauseam has moved in that direction, and I saw some like Rooftop Storm, Acererak shenanigans going on somewhere. So stuff that's vaguely in that space, if it's good, I think Profane Tutor is part of it. I'm not convinced by any of those shells yet, though.
Yeah, I think that Profane Tutor is a very powerful card for something that works in that space. There's also this issue where like people are already going after people trying to cast the null cost cards just due to Living End and Crashing Footfalls. And everything they do is just going to incidentally chip at your Profane Tutors. And that was a really big issue for the Ad Naus deck. However many Ad Nauses are left in that deck, it's still the Ad Naus deck.
The first time your Lotus Bloom gets Void Mirrored, you are just dropping from the league instantly. I don't care what else is going on. You've had enough.
Yeah. Or Teferi. Teferi was the one that just got me. It's just like, come on. Like, it hits the turn, like, player draw, it's the turn before your Lotus Bloom and Tutor are going to, like, unsuspend. It's just so rough.
Yeah, it is highly obnoxious. That's for sure. So outside of that, what other directions could you take black? I guess the card Yawgmoth still appeals to me, and the Yawgmoth deck in its Golgari kind of Undying Eldritch Evolution form was a good deck. I think it's still a fine deck that needs some retooling to deal with the new menaces that have popped up. But to me, the appeal of that deck was always, you are a creature combo deck that gets to use the cards that are good against the other combo decks. So maybe like Yawgmoth with a bunch of Void Mirrors is actually like a decent choice for next week.
Possible. I think it depends on how many Dragon Rage Channelers you expect to play against, but very possible. The black card that we haven't mentioned that I like, but again falls into this camp of like, it doesn't actually give you a good deck. It just ends up in a deck with a bunch of other bad black cards is Damn. The scope on that card is really good for the format. People are playing Terminate, and having access to split card Terminate or Wrath of God is really, really nice.
Yeah, this is effectively a good Orzhov card, right? And it's, where is the good Orzhov deck to put this in? I guess the answer maybe is like the Mardu decks, which are, they're fake Mardu. It's Rakdos splashing white, and that's not the great splash that you want to enable Damn. But I guess if you expect to make like a treasure off Ragavan, or you have several fetchable lands, I don't know if you have to go as far as like Savai Triumph or something, but maybe.
I think the problem is that once you start getting into Mardu, the reason you're going Mardu is for cards that aren't Terminate that kill other stuff. Like, you are going specifically to Prismatic Ending to kill Sanctifier on Vec or like Kaya's Guile. And all of a sudden, this spot for this 2-mana kill spell that kills a Murktide Regent is no longer really that crucial. But looking at these decks, I guess they don't have a ton of ways to kill Murktide, so maybe that's not entirely true.
Yeah, I guess if you're in Orzhov, then Path to Exile is still technically an option, or like Kaya's Guile, which often does line up well against Murktide. So it feels like that problem is almost overdetermined, where it's either a massive problem for your deck or it's really not a problem for your deck at all. And so one additional card doing that thing doesn't move the needle there.
Yeah, it might be the kind of thing where you just get to sideboard a dam for free in one of the Path to Exile spots because, well, you're going to have a big removal spell like that anyways, and then every so often you will want a Wrath.
Yeah, I can see that. What else is there in terms of why black is suffering at the moment? What would need to change for that to change, or any, I guess, black cards or black decks that you think might have the potential here?
I think that's about where the list ends. I started listing like, is Liliana even good? And at that point I knew I had kind of reached the bottom of the barrel. Though I think both of the Lilianas are like not horribly embarrassing if you're abandoning the concept of playing Luris, which is a tough ask.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of Liliana the Last Hope buying back Grief, or Liliana of the Veil working in concert with Grief, and then, you know, you draw a second copy of either of those. It's a good thing to pitch to Grief, so something in that space maybe, but again, why am I doing this instead of just, you know, the Lura stuff, which we're all sick of at this point?
Yeah, it's really tough that the thing you want to recur with Liliana Last Hope is Luris, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's not great.
Yeah, it's tough. What would need to change? I think that the more they keep playing in this space of the black removal, killing creatures or planeswalkers or creatures or enchantments, there could be a breakthrough card there. And I think that the other thing is just another good black 1-drop. Or, like we said, living in a world where Luris isn't a thing anymore. Like, those are the three big things that I think would potentially shift this.
Speaking of killing planeswalkers, I think Wrenn and Six being the best as it's ever been might be a part of this answer as well, where, you know, that card, assuming they have a fetch land, which if your deck is built correctly, then you almost always will, immediately that's getting a card back, so hard to trade at card parity with that one. And then every future turn that Wrenn and Six survives is getting a card which, okay, it's a land, so the actual value of that is somewhat nebulous, but over time, that card just undoes all of your work by itself, and like specifically incremental stuff like Liliana of the Veil, just embarrassed by Wrenn and Six. So just that card being, you know, more popular now than maybe it ever has been, I think is just another nail in the coffin there.
Yeah, the Planeswalker aspect is problematic. Again, also, like, you don't really want a Hero's Downfall anything because Hero's Downfall costs red now. Really tough. Yeah,
so I think that about covers it. So if any of you have ideas for how to revive black and you know, turn around his fortunes in Modern, then by all means let us know. Get in the league, get in the challenges yourself, and show us the hard evidence there. But that's going to do it for our main segment for now. We will be back, of course, to close out this episode with a Nonsense of the Week.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than with StarCityGames.com. Make the best of our 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry when you use any of our 4 simple ways to sell located at StarCityGames.com/sell. You can check out our buy list, box up your cards, and send them our way with the ship and sell program. Come on into the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia for that personal touch. Or if you have everything, 500,000 cards, you want to store and you want to move some bulk, we'll come to you. And seriously, when we're talking about these large collections, Star City does mean they will come to you. The list of places goes from Ohio to New Jersey and elsewhere. Like, seriously, I've driven from Ohio to New Jersey. That is not a short drive. So head on over to StarCityGames.com/sell, that's SELL, for more details on all these great options, and maybe clear up a little space in your life for your next project, even if that happens to just be even more Magic cards or another Commander deck.
All right, and after what initially seemed to be a slow news week in nonsensical terms, we found something which may be an all-timer, a first ballot Hall of Fame member when it comes to the segment here.
Yeah, the leagues and the challenges looked pretty much like people doing variations of normal stuff, but this wonderful Twitter item, it's great. It's great. We've called it Triumphtron is what it looks like.
Yeah, so this user, Trellon, in the past, we have mentioned their contributions to the the mono blue Tron archetype, sometimes featuring Gigantha, just because why not? And that moniker of mono blue has been getting looser and looser every single time you check in with this person, and now it's just flat out dishonest.
Yeah, so this deck is Teamer Tron. It's got a lot of the blue stuff you're used to, but it also has Fury and Valakut Awakening and Fire Ice and Hydra Crisis.
Oh, okay, just to confirm here, are we talking about the list that has Kahira as a companion for free?
Yes, we are talking about the list that has Kahira. Good. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to put myself in the mind of someone on the other side of this who they get paired against this player in a league. Their opponent reveals Kahira. They're thinking, all right, how's my elementals match up? Got to make sure I can kill a Risen Reef on turn 3. And then they just lead with Urza's Tower, and their mind is completely blown.
Yeah, I don't know if you've caught the updates that Tron has tweeted to this, but the latest one has divide by 0 in order to find lessons to pitch to your free spells.
Oh, are we getting a Mascot Exhibition as our 7-drop for our Urza lands?
Yeah, well, there's also an Illuminate History because that card is red.
Naturally.
Yeah, and a basic Conjuring because that card is green. Just so we have another card from the sideboard that we can find that has a color. Oh, also, this list has a Sphinx of the Guild Pact to Karn for because that has colors.
Well, what was the other one? Like Transguild Courier or something? I guess this is an upgrade to that.
Yeah, so Transguild Courier is 4 mana 3/3. It's 4 colorless mana for a 3/3, and it's all colors. Sphinx of the Guild Pact is 7 mana, 7 colorless for a 5/5. It's all colors. It's got hexproof from monocolor, right?
You'll have to tell me. I will trust whatever you say on this one.
I'm guessing. I'm trying to bring up the draft knowledge from early 2019 here. Yeah, it has hexproof from monocolor.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I'm looking at this. We have a Firewild Border Post in the sideboard, which admittedly going to be hard to card that one with our, 12 colorless lands. We got a Hall of Storm Giants, our Ketchio Triumph, and so on. But as you said, sometimes you need a red card to pitch to Fury. You need a green card to pitch to Force of Vigor. So there you go.
Yeah. This deck, I really think that the core story of this deck is trying to get free spells into Tron, and also like the blue Tron shell leaning heavily on Karn. And then so going back to when I tried blue Tron last, which fortunately has not, the urge has not struck me in a while. But the problem I had with Karn the Great Creator is that the blue decks are really, really bad at just like battling on board. And once you start having Fury in your deck, I think that changes a lot, and it makes Karn a much more viable option for this deck.
Interesting. So are you convinced, Ari? Will I see you in the queues with a mono Teamer Triumtron anytime soon?
I don't think so, but this is a good public service announcement for everyone that if they play against this deck, to know what's going on and not be surprised when it actually does something.
In the vein of Name That Nephilim, if we were to sneak this into one of our articles on Star City, what would Cedric call this? Is this Teamer Elementals? 3-color Elementals? Elemental Tron? Like, where are we coming down on this?
I think it would be Teamer Tron.
That feels like it doesn't capture the full majesty of what's going on here. You know?
Maybe Mono Teamer Tron is really the words we need.
Yes, it is descriptive, I suppose, is the word there. So I'm very excited to see where Trellon goes next. And they are sure to, they've already booked their seat for a future Nonsense of the Week segment. That's going to do it for our nonsense and our analysis of the week. I'm on Twitter at Dominavia. You can find Ari at ARMLX. Always a tongue twister there. And we will see you next week for, do we know what yet?
I don't think so quite yet. I think that, we covered all the colors. Maybe we can consider something colorless, but we might just have to dive into the queues and come up with some good content the hard way.
Yeah, really hoping that the purple cards in Innistrad get previewed before next week. Otherwise, we're going to be running short on ideas. But hopefully we'll find something, and you'll find out when we do. In the meantime, take care, everyone.